If you've been at Calvary for a while, you know that typically, pretty much almost every Easter, I remind you that it is kind of a birthday, an anniversary for me, because it was on an Easter Sunday night that I really began to walk with the Lord, to invite Him into my life on a different level than He had ever had been. On a whim, after a weekend of partying, some friends of mine and I left Midtown Memphis and went to Fraser and went to church. And we thought we were being clever, cheeky about it. Then I came back that night by myself. My imagination was sparked. I had a friend who had become a Christian, and I had begun to ask him a lot of questions. And I read two books that I remember, because it's kind of my personality. When I'm kind of leaning into something, I do a deep dive. And I began, and that's still going on actually, but I read Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, which was more philosophical. And then I read Evidence That Demands a Verdict by Josh McDowell, which was interesting to me because both of these men were skeptics. Neither of them believed in Christ or the resurrection or any of that, Christianity. I kind of believed it, but I had also surrounded it with my own religion that I made up and convinced myself. It was basically a way where I could keep doing all the things I wanted to do, but keep Jesus in the picture. But that Easter Sunday night, I prayed by myself. Just came forward. I didn't know what else to do. You've heard the story. Perhaps the last time you'll hear that story. And I just prayed. I didn't know what to pray, so you can say this almost with me because you've heard me so many times. I said, Lord, make me like Mike. He was a good friend of mine, and I didn't know what else to pray. I didn't know what to say, so that's what I said. That night began an adventure, began a journey. I'd love to tell you that ever since then, I've lived pretty much a perfect life. I've been your ideal guy. I've been an amazing Christian, a perfect husband, a great father. I just checked all the boxes. The truth is that I haven't, is that I've had failures and setbacks, and I have just fallen on my face. I've made small mistakes. I've made huge mistakes. But the Lord has been faithful to me from that night until this moment. And I trust He always will be. Now, I said that it's kind of my personality when I get really interested in something. I got interested in my family history and tree. Oh man, I spent hours and hours and hours going back, and I could get back to the 1700s, and then there's a jump to like the 300s. I still haven't filled in that gap, but I kind of burned out on that for a while. I do that with different subjects, different times. Well, I got interested. The way this started is I got interested in the Shroud of Turin. Are you familiar with that? It is a burial cloth that's been around. We can trace it back to like 1100 A.D. Before that, we're not real sure kind of where it was, but it's been hidden away in medieval castles in Europe. And when I first started looking at that, honestly, I was about 100% skeptical. I just thought, that's not it. It's another icon. It's another thing that the church puts away and reveres. And I just thought, I don't think it's it. Well, I've been studying a lot. I just devour every resource I can find. And I've moved a little bit about that. I'm not telling you that's it. But you know what? I'm leaning that way now. I'm like maybe 60 or 70% thinking, I think that was it. I think it's the real cloth that they covered Jesus with when He was buried. Well, that's where it started. So it builds momentum, and we're getting up to Easter. And so I kind of changed gears a little bit because every year I get real interested on what was happening in the life of Christ each day of the week before He died. And so there I go, and I look at, from last Sunday, from Palm Sunday, really a few days before that, but particularly Palm Sunday. And then what was he doing on Monday? What happened on Tuesday? And then Wednesday, wasn't that the day that Judas was spying on him and betrayed him and sold him out? And then there was Thursday, then Friday, the crucifixion. Saturday, it's a very quiet, dark day. And then Sunday, the resurrection. Now, coincidentally, I strongly believe that this is one of those years that the calendars line up. You know how your birthday or how Christmas will fall on a certain day every however many years it is? Well, this is a year that I believe Jesus was crucified on April 3rd, AD 33. So on this day, today's April 5th, right? Okay. It would have been on April 5th, 33 AD, that Jesus rose from the tomb. Isn't that kind of, maybe things like that don't spark your interest that much, but it does with me. One of the things I'd been studying had shown a few of the details that we thought about the death of Jesus, about the resurrection, and I realized that I got a lot of my theology, a lot of the things I think and picture, I got those from medieval paintings and statues. How about you? You look at that and you think, oh, that's Jesus had brown hair and he was, he looked like this, and I realized none of that was exactly true. So in the last really 20 years, there's been this overwhelming amount of research, forensics done with archaeology, with history, with manuscripts, so much that we have found that not only validate our faith, but they take it to a new place. In fact, did you know there's more evidence for the life, death, burial, and the resurrection of Jesus than there is for anything else in ancient history? We have better, more accurate documents about him than we do Aristotle or Plato or Shakespeare. But nobody ever doubts there was a Plato, there was a Shakespeare. We just think, well, of course there was, because we've got these 6 things that tell us. Don't worry about these thousands of manuscripts and everything that talks about Jesus. Some of the things I discovered were just little things. For instance, you know how in the paintings there's always like a crown, a wreath of thorns around Jesus' head? And it's usually about like, it looks like a sweatband. It's about like that, like a bandana, and it pokes into his head, and there's some blood that trickles down. It was actually a helmet. Picture a helmet made out of thorns. Picture a crown, which is what Scripture calls it. There's a whole different word for wreath. It wasn't a victory wreath. It was a crown of humiliation, and it wrapped around his entire head. I don't know if the shroud is real or not, but it shows over 50 deep punctures into the head of Jesus, or whoever that was buried. And they didn't do that to anybody else. They only did it. It was a one-off kind of thing they did just to him, in humiliation, just in mockery. So much like that. So much like that. I've always tried to picture how were his feet nailed? How did that work? And how did they do that? And Psalm 22 says it won't break a bone of his body. And years later, after I've looked at all those paintings, I found they didn't probably crucify him here, but probably here. And now we have archaeological evidence. We have nails, which look a lot like railroad spikes. We have them still in the bones of people here. And sometimes they put smaller ones in the hand. But all of this was considered the hand. We have nails driven through the heels. Probably wasn't like this. Probably was on the sides of the cross. Probably making him straddle that and putting his feet and then nailing the nails like this. We still have that. We have ancient artwork making fun of Christians whom they crucified, as well as the actual physical wood and nails and bones. where you could go in at a place where you didn't have to break it. I'm not going to keep doing this, but I just wanted you to know it may be more credible than you thought. And I think one of the first things that drew me to Christ was his kindness. I just felt his overwhelming grace towards me. And it was so hard to hide from that or escape that with all the ways that I tried. I just sensed that. It was also very hard to move past how credible this is from every viewpoint. That's what drew me to Christ. And I thought, wow, this could be real. And I remember telling a friend of mine, we were driving in a car, street I lived on turned into, it's Hollywood Boulevard there in Memphis, and I said, I think Jesus is really who he said he was. He goes, yeah, I think that too. But we just kept doing what we were doing. I think, no, when you really believe that, when you step into that, you're not going to be lukewarm. You're not going to be like, oh yeah, I guess that's true. No, if that's true, if he's real, oh my goodness, I can't just stay in neutral. I've either got to reject it or embrace that. I chose to embrace it. So recently, watching a lot of basketball, looking on my iPad, just thinking about things. So out of curiosity, I asked the most popular generative AI models the same question, the exact same question. But then after whatever answer I got from that particular one, whether it was Chat or Perplexity or Gemini, I tried to think of all of them, or as many as you know that we found are pretty reliable. Their answer would create my next question. So I'd say, well, what about this? And would this be true? So my original question that I would use, and I would kept pressing for a conclusive answer. And I don't think anything's true just because it's online. Although I don't think they're allowed to lie on the World Wide Webs. If you do the Googles, it's all got to be true. Now, but I did ask this question, just like I say, just messing around. Given all the information we have from history, science, archaeology, manuscripts, firsthand witness accounts, physical and natural evidence, 2,000 plus years of continuance, intelligent, reasonable probability, all the facts that we have available, in spite of the assumption that it would indeed be a truly miraculous historical event, is one of the best explanations for the resurrection of Christ simply that it actually physically happened just as described in the 4 Gospels of the Bible. Most of the answers had one disclaimer. They said, if you believe in miracles. If you suspend natural physical laws to include miracles, then they all said, if you take that for granted and that's accepted, then, and I'll just give you a quote, yes, if you take all the evidence seriously and compare all options fairly, it actually literally happened is one of the best explanations on the table and arguably is the strongest explanation. I thought that was kind of crazy. Let's read what happened. Luke chapter 24. But on the first day of the week at early dawn, they went to the tomb, taking the spices they had prepared, and they found the stone rolled away from the tomb. But when they went in, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were perplexed about this, behold, 2 men stood by them in dazzling apparel. And as they were frightened and bowed their faces to the ground, the men said to them, why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here, but is risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified and on the 3rd day rise? And they remembered his words. And returning from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary, the mother of James, and the other women who were with them, who told these things to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. But Peter rose and ran to the tomb. Stooping and looking in, he saw the linen cloths by themselves, and he went home marveling at what had happened. So the women go to the tomb at early dawn, and Luke specifically names them. And he's the guy who's very detailed about his accounts anyway, but there's no wiggle room. I mean, later when they'd say, so what women were it? There was nobody going, yeah, I don't know, just some ladies, I'm pretty sure it was. No, he said it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and some other women. They can tell you who the rest were. They were the first witnesses to the empty tomb, which has always kind of fascinated us. It kind of makes you smile a little bit because it wasn't powerful men in the community. It wasn't the religious elites. It wasn't any of those. It's just ordinary women, just some gals. Okay, I'm just kidding. In that world, women were treated, at least when it came time to testify, in a formal setting, they were second-class witnesses. Usually they weren't even allowed to testify, or it would take 2 or 3 women speaking to equal one man, their testimony. So things were out of balance, to say the least, but it just wasn't seen as a credible source of information. So that helps explain verse 11, when the women report what they've seen. It says, these words to the guys, it seemed like idle talk. They didn't believe them. The disciples don't look so good right there. That's not a good look. It sounds a lot like modern skeptics. That can't be true. It sounds like something, and I remember saying that. I said, do you believe this because you want to believe it? Because there's a part of me that really wants to believe this. If you're inventing a resurrection story, which would be the biggest story of all, I think at least this is the last way that you'd tell it. You would not make your first named witnesses the very people that your culture is going to discount. They're going to brush that off. You would not admit that your own leaders, guys who would become the who's who of this movement, they wrote it off as nonsense. You ever done things or said things you think you wish you could rewind and go, I wish I hadn't said that, or I wish I didn't take that position, I wish I had. I know they must have been feeling like that. The only reason you put those women front and center would be because that's how it actually happened. They're just reporting it. You can imagine a modern day true crime documentary. I don't listen to documentaries, but we watch a lot of mystery shows. And Catherine, especially from Great Britain and Scotland, and we watch some American ones, but they don't have cool accents. And we've pretty much decided that in retirement, we could get away with crimes. So, because we just know, you do this and you figure all this out. Imagine a documentary where the prosecutor says, our star witnesses are the people that society usually and with good reason ignores, whom we don't typically listen to, and to be honest, at first, we didn't believe them ourselves. Here are our witnesses. I don't know if that's who you'd want to put up there. You're going to put up the experts. You're going to put up people who seem like they're credible or believable. So to me, this doesn't sound like spin. This sounds like somebody reporting an awkward truth. And the guys who wrote this knew, man, if we just report this, it's going to make us look terrible. We look awful in this, but it's the way it happened. So they wrote it about themselves. In the same way, the resurrection accounts just don't read like religious propaganda. That got my attention years ago because they read like honest history. You might wish it were cleaner, or could we change that part? Could we make ourselves look a little nice? But they didn't. They refused to edit anything. They just presented it and said, here's what happened. If you're a Christian, if you follow Jesus, maybe sometimes you doubt. You don't have to be afraid that your faith rests on a fairy tale. And if you're not yet a believer, I'll be honest with you, you're who I'm really talking to a lot, because so many of us in the room, we're already convinced. But if you're not, at least consider this. The way that the story is told pushes real hard against it being myth. It leans more toward reality. Just the way that it's written, the way that it's presented. So keep that in mind. Then in the next few verses, in verse 5 to 7, there's this language of awakening. The angels ask, why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here. He's risen. And I think they probably had big smiles on their faces because they've been waiting. I don't know how many angels there are, but it's like, okay, we need a couple of angels to go and be the first ones to tell this. Can you see all the hands? You remember them from second grade? Me. I was not that kid. I was behind that kid going, don't pick me, don't pick me, don't pick me. I don't know how to spell it. I don't know how to do that problem. But there are some, and one of these angels said, oh, can I get to tell him? So he smiles, and he's a little, he's like, why do you seek the living among the dead? He's not here. He's risen. I don't know. Maybe that's my interpretation. But even the verb has risen carries the sense of being raised up, of being awakening. It's like somebody moving from lying down to standing on their feet. The New Testament word for resurrection, anastasis, it literally pictures someone standing up again. This is not the language of, oh, Jesus, He lives on in our memories and will always be with us. You hear that kind of thing. No, that's not it at all. It's the language of a person who was literally dead and is now alive. There's no wiggle room. That's what it's saying. You can think of the difference between getting out of bed, thinking about it. You're lying there. It's a morning like this. You're so warm. You're so comfortable. And you just kind of glance over the clock. And that's when your mind and body go into this, this little back and forth. You slept for 5 minutes. You could still get ready really fast. I don't know. I probably should get up. You probably should get up now. No, you know what? I've gotten ready much faster than that. And so you start doing that. That's one idea. That's an idea. The other is when your feet hit the floor. I'm up. That's when you're up. That's what this is. This is not the disciples were inspired. That's silly. It's Jesus actually got up. And that's what changed them from skeptics to martyrs. You don't change for just a sweet idea, something sentimental. Something happened. For believers, our hope isn't in some kind of vague spirituality. No, it's in a living embodied Christ. I had someone ask me recently, do you believe that? I said, I absolutely believe it. I said, I'm a pretty smart guy. I said, no, I actually believe it. When you pray, you're not talking to the ceiling. You're not talking to some invisible force or power or anything like that. No, you are addressing a real, risen Lord. And when you think about death, you don't have to cling to, I hope there's something out there. I hope maybe, I've told you, I visited in the hospital, went into an older lady's room. Now I'm an older man. And took her hand, and we didn't know one another, and she said, I'm so scared of dying. She was terrified. And I said, can I pray with you? I chatted with her for a moment. I prayed with her, stepped back out in the hallway. The lights come on. They rush in. She had died. She had died in the time it took for me to leave her room, stand out in the hall, and try to think, okay, where am I? Because hospitals are mazes. God bless those of you who work there. I don't know how you got here today because you get lost in there. And I met her sons. They came up, and I said, hey, excuse me, you don't know me. I'm pretty sure I'm the last person that saw your mom alive, and just want you to know. I got to pray with her. I didn't tell them. I didn't tell them the part where she said, I'm so scared of dying. I'm so scared. You don't have to live like that. The one who stepped through death and walked out again, that's who holds my future. So we've got this empty tomb, and immediately all these conspiracy theories, all these explanations come up. And Luke is very straightforward. I like that about him and the way that he writes. The stone is rolled away, the body is gone, the grave clothes are left behind. It doesn't look like they were torn apart or anything like that. Peter runs to the tomb. He sees those cloths, and he goes home, and Scripture says he was marveling. What happened? And over the years, almost immediately, and then over all the years, people have tried alternative explanations. Well, I'll tell you what I think happened. The disciples must have stole the body. Seriously, have you seen the disciples? The women went to the wrong tomb. Oh, they got mixed up. They didn't have good directions, or anything, so they just went to the wrong tomb, and it was empty. Jesus didn't really fully die. He was just mostly dead. And he revived, and he snuck out. Or it was the story that in the beginning they knew, but later it just kind of kept going and was embellished and became a legend. It's just a story. However, and this is where I started. All those Easters ago. The disciples in this passage, they're not expecting a resurrection. They don't think that's what's going to happen. They reject the women's report. They are scared and they're scattered. They're thinking, we got to get out of town. We don't want anybody to know who we are or recognize us. We can make our way back to our hometowns. We can get our old jobs back. These are not people who are poised to pull off this elaborate hoax and then go on to willingly suffer and die in incredibly violent, excruciating, torturous ways for something they knew inside was a lie, that they had faked the whole thing. And I'm telling you, if somebody's about to hang me upside down on a cross after they've beaten me and done all this, I'm going to say, wait. Just kidding. We made it all up. It's not true. You don't go through it if it's not real. And this idea about the wrong tomb, that just doesn't fit. The women had already seen where Jesus was buried. They had already been there, and the tomb belonged to this well-known figure. He was a local celebrity, kind of a rich guy, Joseph Joseph of Arimathea. That's like me taking you to Memphis and taking you to my old house and saying, see that? That's Graceland. Yeah, are you sure? Because it doesn't look like in the movies or the pictures. Yep, that's Graceland. That'll be $500, please, or whatever they charge now to get in. You think, no, we know that's not it. These ladies would have known if they just simply went to the wrong spot. Plus the fact that on the other side, the opponents of this, they didn't want them, they would have pointed out the right tomb. They didn't want them to find an empty tomb, so they just said, that's not the one, it's over here. And then this thought, it's kind of faded away that Jesus fainted. You know, he passed out on the cross and later he revived. This is sort of just, it's so much easier for me to believe the resurrection. And it clashes with everything we know about Roman crucifixion. It was just horrible. It was brutally efficient at achieving death. Did you know they did this every day? You know, for a lot of these guards, this was their job, just killing people. Thousands of people. Crucifixion. They learned it from the Persians, and they perfected it. And they knew when somebody was dead. So it's just really, really hard to believe that a half-dead man somehow rolled away a massive stone, slipped past the guards, and then fixed himself up enough to convince his followers, I am the triumphant Lord of life. It's just easier to believe the resurrection. And the last idea, I just want to run this down. If you're thinking about this, the whole thing about it was a legend and that over time, there was no overtime. Check this out. You may not know that the resurrection was proclaimed in Jerusalem in the very city of the crucifixion and the burial within a very short time of the events. All the eyewitnesses and the opponents and everybody, they still live there. It wasn't like, well, a long time ago they were going, wait, we were there. We remember this whole thing. There have been only a few, because I'm very old, I've seen a few historical things, and later I've heard people tell it differently, and I think that's not what happened because I was there and I remember the way it happened. Like all of these gospel writers, especially Luke, he uses real names, real places. He invites verification. It's not just spinning some distant myth and it happened. They said, no, this actually, you were there. So we're left with this. Empty tomb, absolutely transformed disciples, unexpected first witnesses, people who were there on the scene, and then this public message where it all occurred. So when you weigh the options and you use standards that you would use for any other ancient event, any event, Christian, Jewish, Asian, whatever. I say again, the resurrection is not the weakest explanation, it's the most reasonable one. The angel said in verse 6 and 8, remember how he told you? Well, you guys were not paying attention. And it says, and they suddenly remembered his words. Jesus had predicted this. He predicted his death, his resurrection, and then this grief and this confusion just drowned everything out. The resurrection was never God scrambling to come up with plan B. Oh, they've killed Jesus, now what do I do? No, it's Jesus doing exactly what he already said he would do. So here's where it gets personal. Many of us have heard Jesus' words for years, but in the middle of fear, in the middle of shame, disappointment, when you're just exhausted, forget these words. The women walked to the tomb carrying spices for a dead friend. they walk away carrying a message that will change the world. Everything changed. It's like, have you ever read an email or been told something by somebody before you get there in your life, in your age, or maybe before you face a crisis, you'd already heard, and you don't think about it, but then when you reopen it, and now you say, now I get it. Now I understand exactly what they were trying to tell me. I think of some things my mother-in-law told me when I was young, and she was my age, and she was telling me, here's how you feel, and here's how this. And I was just thinking, wow, now that I'm there, I get it. Now, I absolutely understand it now. Easter is God's now you see moment for everything that Jesus had promised. All the disciples are looking at each other going, do you remember when he said that? Yes, and he said, we get it, we get it. So listen, when your faith feels dry or your life feels stuck, the risen Lord still does this. By his Spirit, he will bring Scripture back to your mind, not as religious slogans on t-shirts or coffee cups or anything like that, but as living promises backed by a living person. And he's not doing that just to give you new information. He's awakening you to himself. I was telling a pastor friend this past week, I said, our main job is that we remind people of truth. There's not a lot of new things. Some of you have studied Scripture for so long. You've been to so many Bible studies and read so many books, and maybe you have degrees and all that. And what I do, my job is to remind you of that every week, just to remind you. And I think that's what he wants to do through his Word. When you pick it up, you're going to be, I remember this when I was a little girl, when I was a young man. And these words are still there. Okay, so what does this mean for us? Luke ends with Peter marveling. I kind of like that word, at what happened. When he says he marveled at what happened, it's not this deep this calm contemplation, This is an unsettled and amazement. He's awestruck. He's puzzled. He doesn't quite, I can't figure this out. There's anxiety. There's emotion in this because none of this, I've got this new reality and it doesn't fit any of my categories. Anything I thought before. Now I've got to undo all of that. And that's a good place for you. Start with that. I started with that. And even if you are a believer and you're following Christ, don't rush through Easter like it's this yearly ritual that we do, but pause. Just in honest wonder about this. Okay, let's land. Let me ask you this question. What does the resurrection mean for you? What about you? Here's some of the things I have found. It means your past can be forgiven. The cross shows how serious sin is. The empty tomb shows that Jesus' payment was accepted. You do not have to carry your junk by yourself anymore. Your present can be changed. That same power that raised Jesus from the dead is at work in those who still trust him. It wakes us up from being spiritually detached. Did you ever get that way? You're just kind of numb and don't really think about it. It can break patterns that just keep you stuck where you are, especially spiritually. It can give you courage to face some of the fears that maybe rule over you just real quietly. And you probably wouldn't want to tell your friends, like, I'm really scared. I'm fearful. I'm being afraid. And the third thing it does is that your future is secure. Death is real for all of us. Nobody gets out alive. But for those who belong to Christ, it's no longer final. He was raised, so his people will be raised. On that first Easter, the question was, why do you seek the living among the dead? Maybe today, the Lord's asking you something similar. Why are you looking for life in places that are only going to give you death? He's not in the tomb. He is alive. And because he is alive, you can truly live. I never like to put words in people's mouths or say, even when I've led somebody to Christ, and you say, I'll say this, and you repeat it. I've done that, but I'm a little shaky about it because I think you can parrot that, but what's in your heart? I'm going to give you just a suggestion. Maybe your prayer today could be something like this. Would you stand with me, please? I'm just going to read this out loud, and then we're going to worship together. And if you want somebody to talk to or pray with, if you just want to stay where you are, if you'd like to get a cup of coffee later this week or sometime and say, hey, I'm kind of stuck where you were. Let's talk about it. Okay, give me a shout. Here's the prayer you might want to pray today. Risen Jesus, if you really got up from that grave, then wake me up too. Awaken my heart, forgive my past, and help me stand and walk with you.